Okay, so this is such a bizarre case that really spans from Idaho to Arizona, which, oh my gosh, I feel like we see all of these massive high profile cases that seem to involve these two states, Lori Vallow Daybell, Brian Koberger, and now this. Who you're seeing on your screen is 5-year-old Michael Vaughan, who went missing in July of 2021. And that was Stacy Wondra, who is a man now being charged with his murder, even though Michael Vaughan hasn't been found. This is a really odd case. So this is how it all began. In 2021, Michael Vaughan is last seen outside his house in a rural town in Idaho called Fruitland. He's seen wearing a light blue Minecraft shirt, black boxer briefs, and sandals, according to Idaho police. That was the last time he was ever seen. There was an extensive search for the young boy, but pretty quickly an odd tip comes in that Stacy and Sarah Wondra, a couple who live nearby, that Michael's remains may have been on their property. And what you're seeing here on your screen now is that somehow Idaho police were able to get a warrant to extensively search and dig their property back in 2022. Now, there would have had to be something more than just word of mouth that there may be remains on their property to get that warrant. We don't really know what else they actually had at the time. They send cadaver dogs to that home, who then get a hit on a scent of possible human remains. They dig up that area, assuming that they're going to find something, and they don't find Michael Vaughan's body or any parts of his remains on that property. Despite that, though, Sarah Wondra is still charged at the time for failing or delaying notification of a death, but the charges were eventually dropped. So they dig this up. They think that Michael Vaughan's body is there. They don't find anything. And the case really just goes cold. For years, Michael's still missing, even to this day, and there wasn't anything more. Until this past week. Stacy Wandra was actually in prison already for an unrelated charge, and all of a sudden, Idaho police and authorities announced that now he's going to be facing first-degree murder, kidnapping, and destruction of evidence in the disappearance and death of Michael Vaughan. That's a pretty crazy charge list, considering the fact that Michael is still missing. You have to have some pretty damning evidence to be able to prove that in a court of law. But Stacy was here in Arizona, and that's how we kind of started to get involved here, thinking, how did he end up here in the first place? So it turns out that in 2023, he was convicted for unlawful possession of a firearm. He went to federal prison for that, got out, and then violated his probation. And so he was sent back to prison, and he was kind of bouncing around to different prisons until he landed here in Arizona. And that's why he was here. There really was no other connection to Arizona other than now he's here in Maricopa County Court going through the system before he will be extradited back to Idaho in this case. And so basically now he's waiting for Idaho authorities to pick him up so he can go face these charges. Because of that, we don't know why they're imposing those charges at this point in the case. It was very random. It was very unexpected, but he has to be processed back up in Idaho for us to actually learn what's called probable cause, which basically is what detectives use to say, hey, this is why we believe he should face these charges. Here's the evidence. Here's the information that we know so far. That is missing in this case, which to me, coming in at this point, learning about everything, I'm looking at this like, okay, Michael's a little boy, young boy, lives in the safe community, or so they think. How, even if they were neighbors, how on earth did they become the suspects in this case? Well, there's two other people that are also persons of interest who were named that are not the Wondras, and nothing has happened with them either. So clearly there's been some updates in this case that police and even the sheriff's office there are being very tight-lipped about. Really not a lot of information that they're giving out, which is also kind of odd. Do they know where Michael is? We don't know. I wanted to talk this case through with a reporter who is honestly very well known and famous for cases in Idaho and really around the country, Nate Eaton. A lot of our viewers and even podcast listeners have gotten to know who Nate is based on his incredible and extensive reporting of the Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow Daybell case and the missing kids. Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow. Nate and I met during that trial, and he and his team at East Idaho News have been also covering this case for some time and reporting these updates. So he and I did an interview earlier today talking about what we now know, but also what does this likely mean? What do these charges probably mean for Stacy Wondra? What does this mean that authorities likely have? We talk it out, so I want to bring you the interview now with Nate Eaton. All right, Nate, excited to have you on the show for the first time. I think a lot of people know you from all of your coverage on the Lori Vallow Daybell case for so many years. East Idaho News, you now host Courtroom Insider, and that trial and that case is how we got acquainted in the first place. But you also cover so many other cases, and this one is bizarre to say the least, and just another Idaho, Arizona bizarre connection. Had you known about this case before all of this came out this past week?
Yeah, so this all began back in 2022. We're in eastern Idaho, which is about 5 hours away from Fruitland, where this happened. So it's kind of a geographical challenge to cover it, like boots on the ground to be there. But we do cover stories that happen all throughout Idaho. And I just remember when Michael Monkey disappeared, it was a bizarre case, obviously, anytime a child goes missing, and to be from such a small town that doesn't really have crime happen. So it's one of those that we've been kind of covering from a distance, from afar, watching the new developments. And I'll be honest, when the news came out last week on Halloween that there had been this arrest, it was kind of surprising, but in a way wasn't surprising. But it's nice to see the cases moving forward.
So it is weird because Stacy Wondra, who is now facing first-degree murder charges, kidnapping charges in this wasn't a name that popped up out of nowhere just randomly this past week. He was named as a person of interest suspect with his partner years ago, and it was odd, and she was charged, and then the charges were dropped, and Stacy wasn't charged, and he had gone on the record saying he didn't know anything about this. But then there was video of him telling police he knew where Michael's body was. So I guess take me back to how, I know they were neighbors, but Michael Vaughan was 5 years old. How did he know the Wondras? Was there any relationship there other than just being neighbors?
I don't know the extent of how deep their relationship was, but I would imagine they obviously somewhat knew each other. And to the point you mentioned, them being suspects back in being named suspects originally, or people of interest, that the police thought that there was enough there to dig up the yard. I mean, that was so interesting to me. And the fact that that video you talked about back then, when the police, I don't know if you have watched that whole thing, but it's pretty damning or pretty eye-opening for him to be telling the police this is where the body is. So the extent of their relationship, it's clear that the Michael's mom knew who the Wondras were, but I don't know the extent of how close they were. Fruitland, Idaho is a small place, though. If you're on the same street, if you live less than a half a mile away, you're likely going to know the people. You're likely going to know most people in the town, in the community.
That's helpful to know. I was going to ask you that, too. I mean, we know rural, small towns just in general, but are we talking like a couple streets? Like tiny?
Farm community. The closest city to you where you'd go to a mall or to do shopping would be Boise, the Nampa area. It's small. I mean, it's very farmland community. I have a friend that just moved there to actually start a physical therapy practice or join in with one, and he had moved from a larger city and said it's very small town feel, which is, I think, why the fact that this happened there was so startling.
Yeah. Like a safe community, know your neighbors, that kind of thing. So they dig up the Wondra's backyard in 2022. And this was odd because the cadaver dogs found a scent. Then they get there, they dig it up. They don't find his remains. But there was a tip that had come in from somebody saying that Michael was buried on their property. Do we know, was that the only piece of evidence that police had to be able to get a warrant to dig up the backyard? Or was there more that they had found at the time that led them there?
There may have been more, but publicly they have not released a lot on this case. In fact, I think the police department itself maybe did one initial interview or statement when this happened, but they have been very closed-lipped since it happened. You would think, you've covered these cases a lot, Briana, they've got to have something more, you'd think. I don't know if going to a judge for a warrant to dig up somebody's yard by simply saying, someone gave us a tip that he's there and the cadaver dog got a scent. I don't know. You'd think there would be something more, but as you mentioned, he wasn't found. Now there is the theory out there that maybe somebody moved the body from the yard that it was there and went somewhere else. So that's a great question, and I imagine now that the charges have been filed, if once he's extradited back here, if they decide to go with a probable cause hearing, we'll know some of that. We'll get some of that. There'll be witnesses that testify to that. If they go the grand jury route, then we might not hear about that until the trial. But we'll see what other evidence and information they had.
I mean, it's odd, and also there were two other people that were named as persons of interest back in 2022. Do we know what happened to them? I feel like we've heard nothing since then. It doesn't seem like there's been other charges other than Stacey's partner, who then they were dropped. So
Yeah.
where does that leave anybody else?
Yeah, so Sarah was charged and in connection to this case, and then it was dropped, but now she's serving time for something else. And then, of course, Stacey was mentioned.
Yeah.
The other two, good question. Again, that's another thing that we'll see. And it seems that in this case, here we are almost 5 years later, when this, or sorry, 3 years later, almost 4, that this development comes out kind of out of the blue. And it makes you wonder if once they get Stacy Wondra in custody and he has an attorney and they go through, if he will start to divulge more information, or we will learn more about those other two people of interest. Or it could be simply that they name them and they don't have enough to go after them, and so they haven't.
I assume too. I mean, in theory, they could also give them some sort of immunity to give up information too in the case against Stacy. They must feel that there's something more against Stacy than anybody else, especially given that it's first-degree murder. I mean, at least in Arizona, that's a pretty clear premeditation kind of evidence that they would have had to have, and that is hard given that there is no remains or body found, at least that we know of. Do we assume that that has to come from DNA evidence or something to be able to file first degree, or somebody would have had to show some sort of premeditation, or is it different in Idaho?
No, you have to show some sort of premeditation for first degree, and the fact that there is no body is what immediately caught my attention, because sure, if they're going to announce these charges, they found something and they still haven't. Maybe it is a pressure tactic on him when he gets in to say, okay, you negotiate with us, you tell us where he's at, and we'll lower the charge. Or with first degree too, you can go for the death penalty in Idaho. It would be very, very hard to, I think, to get death penalty without a body. But it has happened. You know, the prosecutor in the Koberger case, Bill Thompson, he actually is one of the only prosecutors in Idaho history who has ever gotten a murder charge guilty without a body, a no-body murder charge. So it's very rare to do that. But the fact that they filed this, they must be pretty confident, or they got new information, or they got new evidence back, or new DNA back that made them go ahead and do this. Of course, we'll probably know more once he is back here, and maybe, you know, in a year or two when it all comes together. But for now, there are so many questions.
And that is hard, because typically when somebody is arrested, we get that probable cause document. We can see the details of what led to the arrest. But the problem is he was already in custody. And that was weird, too, having to go through what that was. Unlawful possession of a firearm. He was in federal custody, then let go, then violated the probation. And that's how we ended up here in Arizona. There was no other affiliation or connection with Arizona. He's been to several different prisons, federal prisons, around the states, kind of in the West, and ended up, so happens, in Arizona at the time of this. Interestingly enough, during his initial appearance, he was kind of asking, I need to let family members know, I need to be able to speak to an attorney type thing. That would lead me to believe he's probably not going to be very forthcoming, but who knows? Who knows? I mean, we just don't know.
And if he's familiar with the legal system and he's faced charges before, he probably knows enough to say what will help him. I would imagine he's going to look out for whatever will benefit him.
Yeah.
And if it is a fact, one would hope he would come back and say, I did it. Here's where Michael is. Sentence me. That's likely not going to happen. But the prosecutors could go in and say, you know, let's talk. Let's try to get a plea agreement out of this. If Michael is still in the state of that he can be found. You know, there's these other cases where young children, they do horrible things to them and they're not unable to be recovered because they're in a body of water, or they're, you know, they've been tortured, or, you know, horrible things happen to them. So I don't know. And what was interesting to me in that initial appearance there in Maricopa County, Briana, is that he acted like he didn't know the system. Like, well, I don't really know what this is about. But as you mentioned, he does have priors. He has dealt with the court system before. He knew enough to waive extradition.
Exactly.
You might think, oh, let me get an attorney here. But again, and then bond was set so high. So he knows enough that he's not going to be walking free for a long time unless he can post that big bond amount.
Well, totally. And certainly he knows he was being investigated for this crime. I mean, that wasn't news to him either. You did mention, and we noticed this too on our end, Idaho authorities have been so tight-lipped. I mean, even trying to get any confirmation really has been a failure on just even getting anything. We're kind of relying on Idaho media who might have a prior connection with them to help with some information. But is it possible, because authorities are being so tight-lipped, that they may know where Michael's remains are and are just not saying it yet?
Perhaps. I would hope, and I would think, and more so hope, that if they do find him, or if they know where he's at, that they would and not come out and say it until they have him. Of course, if you're gonna, if you might have suspicions. I've covered this other missing toddler, Dior Coons. He's been gone 10 years, and they get all sorts of tips from all over the place. Check here, check here. They follow up on them. There are certain areas where investigators might believe Michael could be. They're not going to come out and say, we believe he's here in this campground or by this river, because of course you're going to get people that will go down there and look.
Yeah.
What I hope is that if he is found, when he is found, they do come out immediately and say he has been found. And I don't think they would hold that back. Again, it's a small police department. It's a prosecutor's office that is not used to handling these huge cases.
Yeah.
I think even in the news release on Friday, they didn't even name Stacy. Yeah, so it was interesting that you kind of had to put the pieces together to figure out who are they talking about and what agencies are they doing and are working this case. And it has been a struggle to get information out of it. I do give you that for sure.
Yeah, and that was the thing. We had to get to court documents to find the charges, even because in Arizona, the court documents only said a fugitive warrant out of Idaho, and so that complicated it even more. Based on the terrain of the Fruitland area, you know, like some people think, just in general, like even here in Arizona, people think it's really populated in Phoenix, and it is, but then obviously the outskirts, there's a ton of desert areas, which honestly makes it really difficult when you're searching for remains, because they could literally be anywhere and it's so vast. I assume that could maybe be the same situation with farmland too, if it's vast and rural. Are there many places that he possibly could be? I mean, they obviously don't believe he's alive anymore.
Right. Yeah, they've said that publicly. You could drive 10 miles in any direction, Briana, and dispose of somebody who would likely never be found. There is the with farmland. I'm just trying to pull up the population of Fruitland right here, just to kind of give you an idea.
Yeah.
But there is farmland that farmers work every season. So they do work the ground. And while it might look remote to me or you as we're driving by, they're out there, you know, getting their crops. They're out there. So that land would be worked. I would think, though, the bodies of water might be more problematic. The deep bodies of water, not the canals or whatever. So Fruitland, to give you an idea, Fruitland itself proper has less than around 5,000 people.
Oh, yeah, really small.
Yeah, so it's quite small. I mean, they have the mayor. It's right kind of near the border, but more toward the Boise end of things. So I know many of you aren't familiar with Idaho, but it's not a hugely populated area. But you can be in Boise in an hour, which is a large populated area. But you could also drive to the forest and where no one visits for decades and dispose of someone. So it really is, you know, unlimited possibilities. You'd think, though, that they could track the cell phone pings, maybe stuff like that.
I mean, you'd hope so. It feels like that's the way that things go these days, or any. Well, I guess part of the issue here is like surveillance footage or any sort of, you know, doorbell ring cameras. That seems, you know, less likely there, which that becomes hard. But yeah, cell phone pings, unless they were smart enough to leave the phones at home, turn them off, and not take them. I don't know. The weird thing, and this still blows my mind as somebody who's learning about the case now as it's unfolding. What would have been a motive for the Wondras, an adult couple, to take the life of a young 5-year-old boy who is not part of their family, just a neighbor? I mean, do we know anything at all about that?
No idea. No clue. I mean, that's the question. Was it just a spur of the moment action if they did do something? But the fact too that maybe one person might have a inclination to do it, but to have two people involved, I don't know. And it there's so many questions with this one, because as we said, I remember the day that they were digging up that yard. It's like, wow, they must really think he's there, and seeing the bulldozer and they're ripping up the yard and nothing. And obviously there was some sort of hint to do it. So I don't know. I don't know why they would do this. I know that the family is just crushed and it's taken forever. Whatever it is, though, it's interesting to me. Something big must have happened in the last week or so to have the charges come down.
Yeah.
Whether they got DNA evidence back, whether they got a really solid tip, whether they got something in. I'm just curious what that is. Why now? And why on Halloween Day they send out the release? They were ready to announce it. It's just an interesting development.
Totally, totally. Obviously, I know a lot of people are following this as it unfolds further, and hopefully we'll learn more once he gets back to Idaho, is extradited, and we get court paperwork filed there in the case. I assume you're going to be covering this as it continues. Where can people find you? I already know you have a huge following, but if people are watching and they don't know, or they want to be able to follow your work and everything you do, where can people watch and consume your content and all the news that you report typically?
Well, I probably post the most on Facebook. That's Nate Eaton Reporter. But EastIdahoNews.com is the place. And I have to shout out our partners in the Boise area that have really been covering this, from the Idaho Statesman's, KIVI TV. We work with them because it is so far to go. But should this go to trial, one, I doubt they would, and I say should because, there could be a plea agreement. But if it does go to trial, I doubt they would hold it there in that very small community. It could be hard to get a jury. It's possible, though. So it could be moved to Boise, where Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell had their trials, where Brian Kohberger was going to have his trial. It's the biggest city in Idaho, and they have more potential jurors. So I would imagine that could happen, and that could be a year away. But we'll cover it then. If it goes to full trial, we'll be there, and that's when you'll hear the witnesses, you'll hear the evidence, and hopefully finally get some answers to the questions that you and I have.
Yeah, God, Boise has seen so many massive cases recently, which is so wild. And I guess, if they're happening in small areas, they got to go to the big city for the jury pool. But it's just crazy to think that they could have another big high-profile one on their hands.
I know.
Just almost one after another. Vallow, Daybell, Kohberger, possibly now this. I appreciate all your insight on this, and it's so nice always getting to work alongside you. So thank you for coming on the show, and I know we'll stay in touch. Again. I know, so good to see you, and outside of the courtroom too. So that's great.
Right.
All right, thanks, Nate. I appreciate it.